Welcome to First Thought Backstage at Galway International Arts Festival. I am Paul Fahey, Artistic Director of the festival, and in this series we get to sit down with theatremakers at Festival 2022 to discuss the ideas behind and the making of their shows. You can listen back to all episodes via giaf.ie or find First Thought Backstage on any podcast platform. First Thought is presented in association with University of Galway.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr Barry Houlihan, Archivist at NUI Galway, and joining us for tonight's post-show talk after the first child are cast members Samuel Levine, Emmett O'Hanlon, Sarah Shine, and we're also joined by conductor Ryan McAdams. Good evening, everyone, and thanks everyone for staying on. We're very, very lucky not just to see this stunning performance this evening, but even more so, we'll be joined by Ryan McAdams, conductor, I should say, this evening, and we'll be joined shortly by a few more of the cast members once they get a chance to draw breath. So we'll begin. You'll take a seat. We'll begin. Okay. So, you have a chance to draw breath as well.
Yeah.
After that
I'm all right.
Spectacular performance and production. Where to begin? We have an ensemble. We have a choir. We have the musicians. We have Enda Walsh. We've done a Cadenihi. Where to begin? And you were the driver of all this evening. How do you harness all that creative energy? Where do you begin?
It's a great question. First of all, thank you all so much for coming. Did you enjoy is a weird word with this show, but was it effective? Was it? Yeah. I have the enormous privilege of having this is the second opera I've done with Donica and I conducted and premiered The Second Violinist, but pre-pandemic times. And so I've been through their process. And it's just like, it's like driving a train of wild lions. Like, it's just enormous. And one of the extraordinary things about it, because this is not a normal opera, they imagine the show with this extraordinary crash ensemble as part of the visual of the show. That their kinetic, energy is as much a part of the show as everything that happens up here. Which means that we can kind of release and go bananas as we need to, and then we actually get to have really wonderful kind of dramaturgical conversations about how we make sure that we don't draw focus from the audience from the stage when the audience's attention needs to be here, and then how do we take over the narrative visually and musically when we do that. But it always starts when Donica sends me the score. Enda Walsh has written this libretto in a fever dream in like a matter of days. And then often with Enda, the most extraordinary thing about that partnership is, when Enda writes a play, he'll write it, and then he'll get to the first day of rehearsal, and he'll it's as if he's never seen it before. He kind of rediscovers it, and then everyone in the room just figures it out in the most incredible, creative and collaborative way. When Enda sends the libretto to Donica, who's a composer, Donica has to make all these decisions about what this world is, and what these characters are, and what they mean to each other, and what's the subtext, and what's the psychology. He has to put that all in the music before we ever get to day one of exploring the show and asking those questions. And I don't know how Donica does it, but somehow what we end up making is this kind of perfect synthesis of their work.
Yeah, it's exactly that synthesis, and the beauty of this festival, perhaps even more so than others, is that coming back together as an audience. That process, the coming together of all those collaborations from the festival itself here with Landmark, with Irish National Opera. Could that have worked if restrictions had not lifted? Could that process have taken a different turn, or would the work have been something entirely different?
It's a really great question, because we actually kind of experienced this already, what it was like because we built the show last year and opened it. We actually rehearsed it in Galway because Enda had another show here, so we all slept down in Galway, and we came back and we opened it in Dublin. But all kinds of restrictions were still in place. We rehearsed the show with masks on, we rehearsed it socially distanced, we had the crash ensemble. The joy of this run is that we are all so tight-knit together, but in Dublin, we had to be, meters apart. And the music is so intricate, which it meant it sometimes felt like trying to drive a 16-wheeler from the back. So it was just with all of those restrictions, and worst of all, no open pubs to celebrate the success afterwards. And believe me, after the show, you need a drink or 10. And so to be able to come back to the show, having gone through the enormous kind of emotional and physical difficulties and challenges, having put it together and built it the first time, to come back with what feels like a kind of effortlessness, because these restrictions have lifted, and then to put it on stage and play it and act it and sing it the way we really imagined we wanting it to go, but not quite being able to get there last year. This just feels like a victory lap. Oh, I also want to say, when we opened the show on Monday, it was like being on the surface of Mars in this room. We were so hot. After the dance that Kaya, the young girl, does, and Crash is going bananas. We call it the sacrificial dance in ourselves. After that, our pianist nearly passed out. I nearly fainted twice, and I kind of had a dry heave outside before I came on stage for the bow. So doing it tonight was like doing it in the Arctic. So.
That's great. Yeah, the one-day heat wave, I think, thankfully didn't carry on too much after then. So, yeah, you mentioned the second violinist, and of course this is a trilogy work with the Last Hotel, followed by the second violinist, and here we are with the first child. They perhaps progressively get darker as they go through. None of them are too easy and light on theme and topic. But one thing that always strikes me about those works is, one thing you said about the visual narrative that's there. I'm talking about the technology and the visuals that are so stunning, projected here on the backdrop. That adds another layer of synchronicity between the musicians and the visuals and the performers. Is that another challenge for you as a conductor, to blend all those things together?
That's a really great question. I think, I don't have to, thankfully, we have such an incredible set of stage managers here. And by the way, the woman calling the show tonight jumped in at the last minute because our usual stage manager got COVID. Anna did a brilliant job. And was not in any way responsible for the technical thing that happened at the beginning of the show. She's a rock star. But thankfully, I don't have to coordinate anything with the back. There are a lot of opera productions these days that use projections, and often it almost feels, unless they're done really well, they can feel a bit like, almost a distraction or an apology for a feeling that the show, something isn't theatrical enough, that it's not going to, compete with Netflix or whatever. But the way that Enda thinks about technology, in the texture of the show, it's the way we use technology in our psychology. It's an incredibly important part of the psychology of these characters. And then when we all put it together, we all get to be amplified, so we don't have to worry too much about balances. And then there's all kinds of amazing, I mean, everyone knows, but part of the technology, one of the things that Donna kind of invented for this show were these 3 keyboards, all which are slightly tuned differently to each other, and deliberately so. And it creates what we kind of been calling like a gamelan effect, where there's this kind of unholy shimmer coming up from the middle of it, which is sometimes quite like a lullaby. Sometimes it's this dark wave. Sometimes it's like poison smoke. But I do think all of these things tend to eventually find their way together. But these shows do get darker. Second Violinist was kind of opera dark. It was kind of fun dark. This was genuinely traumatizing to put together, especially for me because when I first got the score, I had my first child was 2 years old, and I live in Brighton in the UK, and we have these windows that look out onto the ocean. So imagine me studying this score with the waves coming at me and my child running around at my feet. So nice to have a little emotional distance. Hi, welcome guys.
Hey.
Good job.
Very warm welcome to our company members who've joined us. We've Emmett, we've Sam, and we've Neve as well. Sarah, welcome and congratulations. We've just been talking a little bit about the journey to putting all these wild, collaborative and artistic forces together that you then manifest on stage and bring those characterizations out. And in the midst of that heavy story and those dark themes that we talked about here, each of you still look like you're having tremendous fun at the same time as well, but can you talk about getting these characters live, getting them up on stage before, as we've seen here tonight?
Sure.
Is everyone, your mic on?
Yeah.
You okay?
Are you mic'd? I'm mic'd. Okay.
Just put this back over here. Am I on? Is this working?
Can you hear Emmett?
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
I'm mic'd also, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Sorry about that. You want to go first?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So, hi, I'm Emmett. I play Simon. And for me, the experience was it was interesting because I don't know about you guys, but the audition for this production, I was in America and we did 5 auditions, I think, for 4 or 5, and then the last one was an interview with the whole team, including including Donica and Enda on that call said, "Well, I see Simon as the only normal one. He's the one that the audience is going to relate to, and he's gonna be the audience reacting to these crazy people around him." And we all laughed, and then there was a big pause, and he said, "So Simon is essentially me." So it was easy. It was easy for me because I just watched Enda work and figured there's Simon. Literally, my first costume I wear was Enda was wearing those clothes the second day of rehearsal. So
Oh my god.
that was my experience with Simon.
That's crazy.
For me, well, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you all for coming, guys. I was so happy to know that I was doing the role of Karen because I knew about how amazing the first 2 operas that they had done as part of their trilogy. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, like it's quite a complicated character of Karen because we have kind of a lot of discussions with Enda. The whole process is always so wonderful and very collaborative. Everybody has their say. Ryan knows what's happening with the music. Donica is there as well. And I think in the first couple of weeks of rehearsals, there were so many different paths that the story could take, even though the libretto and the text was there. There were so many different journeys, and Enda could come and just say, "Do you know what? I actually think that at the end of this scene, she feels like this," and then you're like, and he gives you such a palette to play with. And we have all of those stored, I guess. That's how I feel for the performances, that sometimes when we come out there's slight differences because every time it's going to be different, and Ryan is always here to catch us with those, you know. But I think it's a story that people can relate to because everybody at some point in their life has been, you know, through, you know, being bullied or not being like the one who's picked for anything or harassed, and I think it's very important to realize that you don't know where someone's breaking point is, and I think that's what's really sad. And especially towards the end with Karen, I think that we had talked a lot about it. And for me, I wanted it to be that, you know, she's done this horrible thing she's at the end of, you know, of everything, but you still want to feel something for her because people can relate to her, I think. But also with Neve's character of Alva, you know, she really has these digs and she has these comments that she makes, but there's something so relatable about her as well. So even though we each had our own person to work with, we could see each other in every character. Simon, Gary, everybody knows a guy like Gary who comes in and just not ruins the party. Sorry, Gary, not ruins the party, but just everything explodes around him.
He is the
So we always had a lot of joy in like just playing a lot with the rehearsals, and
And as far as the process that Sarah was referring to last year when we originally rehearsed this production, we were very lucky as performers because we had our maestro, we had the composer, and we had the librettist all in the same room the whole time, which never happens. I mean, you're lucky if you get one of those people for the entire rehearsal process. So when Sarah was talking about the collaborative nature of the rehearsal period, there were full hour and a half bits of rehearsal where we'd all just sit in a circle and just talk about how we're feeling after 2 or 3 weeks of rehearsing it. Do we think the characters have changed? And I mean, getting the musical perspective from Ryan through that whole process, again, unbelievably rare, but I think is a huge part of why it's so impactful, because everything is related. The orchestra feels what we're doing, and
because they were there the whole time.
And also because everyone is like extremely nice.
Yeah.
I think it's the best process like ever to have that kind of joy in the rehearsals for such a heavy story.
I promise Sam is not typecast. He's not typecast.
Well, you don't know me that well.
All right, you might be typecast.
Well, actually, it's funny because everybody else you saw on stage was part of this big artistic collaboration where they had weeks and weeks of intense work to develop these characters. And I only came in like a week and a half ago to join this process. So, in a way, it's perfect because on stage, all the other characters are in deep, long relationship with each other. You have a marriage and you have this childhood traumatic acquaintance. And Gary's just some dude from Tinder. He just shows up. He doesn't know any of these people. And he, you know, in my first discussions with Enda, he said, Gary's an agent of chaos.
Yeah.
And that's, you know?
And Sam's eyes went,
Sam's like,
Yes.
okay.
So he shows up and he just starts throwing grenades and trying to disrupt what everyone else is doing. And artistically, that's exactly what I got to do. I got to show up and say, oh, so how did you guys do it last time? What if we did it this way this time? You know, what if the relationship is like this? What if that happens? And playing the disruptor as an actual newcomer was quite fun.
We actually found Sam on Tinder.
It's been such a...
Oh.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Is this mic on?
Is this on?
You might have to press a button.
Oh, yeah?
Hey.
I just want to say, like, what kind of an extraordinary... I mean, everyone up here is working so hard with every tool they have to bring these characters to life. And I think... I mean, am I right in thinking this was your and Neve's first contemporary opera? Is this pretty cool? Or like one of the
Yeah,
first?
like a major one. And so fleshed out and so
Yeah.
full with many, many ideas.
And often when singers, when anyone approaches a new work for the first time, you know, there's often not much time to get much beyond getting all the notes right, getting all the rhythms right, trying to just put it in shape. And the joy of working with Enda is somehow, even though he's got all the pieces constructed in his head, he creates a sense in the room that everyone's making it up as we go along. That every decision everyone makes is theirs to own and to play with. And that even extends, I think, in some way to the music making. And that process, with Enda, can take weeks. And so it's astonishing to me that Sam showed up and literally restaged the show in 4 days and took a whole journey through to get to this point and build these relationships with everybody else. But then to integrate Crash Ensemble, who I'm so outrageously fortunate to be their principal conductor. I mean, they are not just ferocious musicians, as I'm sure you all can tell, but they're really theater animals too. Like they're visceral, theatrical people. And while in rehearsal, I can talk to them about, you know, this needs to be this articulation or this balance or this idea. But if I talk to them in terms of the stagecraft and the dramaturgy, if I try to explain to them, as I said, like what their role in the totality is, I can see that's when their lights behind their eyes turn on the brightest. And that's when I know we're gonna discover new things. And I think the addictive part of working on an opera with someone like Enda is you get to experience that thing that is the heart of theater and the most elusive thing to find in opera, which is the possibility for spontaneity. Because everything in theater is usually scripted, frozen. The score itself, because it has a tempo and a pace, tends to lock things in. And theater lives in that new thing that everyone gets to respond to. And there's something about this process that allows us to do that and create the show radically new every night.
Yeah. I think on that note, it helped all of us coming in. It helped that Ryan and Donica and Enda already had this kind of team mentality because they worked together already. And not once from any of them did we hear, well, it's that way because I want it that way. Literally now, and it's funny, but every gig as an opera singer I've done, there's been some way of, this is the staging because that's the staging I want you to do. Not once, even if it was completely different from what Enda wanted or Donica wanted or Ryan wanted, there was always okay, cool, let's try and see where that fits in. So even if you were tricking us, I really appreciate it.
We can, I think, perhaps have a time for a few questions. Please. If anyone in the audience has any as well. While anyone is gathering their thoughts, I might just put one more point here to the panel. Is that synchronicity between the performers and the music, but even the stage is one thing I was struck tonight about. Even the set and the stage felt like it was its own instrument. There was percussion and stamping and noise and sound coming from people.
Isn't it great?
And it was, I mean, like you say, you have so much freedom. You weren't given direct, hard and fast rules, but you still had that freedom to react and incorporate all the stage as its own instrument.
Yeah, this is this whole thing is a living entity. There's no wall here. This all exists in one vortex. And so if there's noise up here, it is part of the noise down there, and vice versa. And so and there's the other part we haven't talked about. Is Elaine Kelly here? Elaine is my assistant. I don't know if she's around. But anyway, she not only is a brilliant assistant, but she's the one who prepared the children's choir. Yeah. And aren't they amazing? The kids are over there. They're right there. They're amazing. But you cannot believe how difficult that music is for them to learn. They had to sing such dissonant intervals so close together that there's nothing for often them in the orchestration of the band for them to hold on to, and they not only sang brilliantly but were just amazing performers. I mean, just gave much. And what's astonishing is I'm doing slightly different things with them every night, and they're responding to it, and they're living it with everybody else, and I just think they're just awesome.
Anyone in audience land who wants to put anything to our remarkable group of people here on stage?
It's okay to ask what happened in the show.
Anything you want.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how you integrated the dance into the piece.
Kaya.
Give it up for Kaya.
Yeah.
The dancer.
So the dance. So I got this score, and there was a big chunk in the middle that just said dance, and it was missing. And then about literally 5 days before the first rehearsal, Donica sent me the dance. And he was like, oh, it's going to be a couple of pages. Do you remember how long that dance was? It's like the absolute living, angry, poisonous heart of the show. And Kaya worked with an amazing choreographer, Emma, who is here all the time, has been here throughout this process. And what's astonishing about Kaya is that she's not a professional dancer. They found her on, I think it was like a YouTube video or something, where she was just like, it was like a student, she just like decided to make an arty video of her kind of moving through a train station, and she was just such a naturally interesting mover, and they said, I want her. And she came in and she basically became a professional dancer for this show. But what's so wonderful about that is you can tell the unhinged unprofessionalness of it, the rawness of it is what is so deeply heartbreaking and kind of emotionally exhausting to witness.
Also, she has never acted a day in her life ever, which makes me feel bad about myself. She's incredible.
Yeah,
it was such an effective way to close out the show as well, especially after the immersion of the music and the singing all evening, and then there was silence, just her dancing. It was stunning. Absolutely stunning way to finish out.
We all feel exactly the same way as you are at that moment. When all you hear is Kaya's body moving and everything. Oh God, it's.
Anyone else? Anyone else in the audience? I see your hands up here, gentleman here.
Hi there. So I have a thought question. At first, when the show ended, I was a little confused, and then I realized my confusion was because I was expecting maybe to be stolen. I was expecting some kind of murder, because it's an opera. And then I realized, oh God, the tragedy is that this person has to live with the impact of what happened, and that's the tragedy. But I wanted to ask you folks how you felt about it. It seemed like a non-traditional turn for opera not to have that big moment. I mean, there were many other big moments, but not that plot moment that I guess one comes to expect in traditional opera. So I wanted to ask you how you felt about it.
You're the one that does it.
I think, I think that Enda loves, we'll do this and we'll feel like that's the ending, or that's the kind of crux of it, but actually over here is what we should be looking at, or like over here is what's going to happen later on. And I think, yes, it is really obvious, or standard opera to somebody, stabs the person and it's like the ending of what it is. But exactly, it isn't. It's that we all make decisions in our life and you live with those consequences. And of course, there's like a mythic kind of aspect about this show, meaning that Karen, this character now, has finally, I guess, found relief from her pain by taking something from this person who's hurt her. And so when she is going to forever live in this horrible cycle where everything just repeats and repeats over in this mythical aspect of it, there's the shock, but there's also this resignation of I knew I was going to be here because I knew that from being a child and all the hurt that I've always carried, finally the hurt is gone and now I'm going to live with that consequence. So I think for us it was we spoke about that, how is the show going to end? What way are we going to do it? And yeah, just the idea that it's just a cycle, that everyone gets mixed up and you're just caught in this feeling of or you're drowning basically in this feeling of I don't know, relentlessness and infinity.
What does Enda use as the metaphor for the beginning? I mean, the idea is the opera starts and you kind of think it's going to be like a romantic comedy, kind of a weird romantic comedy, and there's these two, and they're married or not, and then it very, very suddenly takes a weird turn.
Yeah, Enda was very clear. We are going to lie to the audience about what this is at the beginning. I will say from a musical perspective, and you're absolutely right, there is not a pinnacle, dramatic, climactic moment where this baby gets sucked into the waves, because on some level it's happening all the time through the show. Yeah, that moment is happening from the beginning of the show through the end, because we are living this woman's full life in the three versions of her in a cycle. And the musical depiction of that is the waves. There is not a bar of this score where something is not swelling and decaying. Yeah. The waves are constant, and they start from the beginning, and when we get, you say nothing really big happened, but actually this aria that Sarah sings at the end is one of the longest and hardest and most exhausting things I've ever seen written for a singer, and Sarah is outrageous in it.
Yes. Yes.
And what I love about the music is that it doesn't just reach a high note or a climactic statement. There's just this extended sequence where she is up in the stratosphere and the orchestra is just battering her with waves of different size and different duration, as if now she's just in a spin cycle, for the rest of her life. And this is the moment that will root her to this. It's an astonishing thing musically. And it's very difficult to do because, as you heard, a lot of the music is very rhythmic. It's very interlocking. And they have to keep that groove really steady while individually all of them are swelling and decaying and making these bigger and smaller waves.
So I would also say, just as a fan of opera as an art form, that while opera can be a great number of different things. So while many operas do revolve around this one huge event, climactic stabbing or something, there's a lot of precedent for this kind of living in the aftermath as the piece. Billy Budd is one great example where it's this man trying to process the thing that he's seen. And Berlioz, his Le Troyen is the war is already over. Achilles is already dead. People are just trying to make peace with it. Or all the Orfeo, the Orpheus operas where it's well, my wife is gone. What am I going to do? There's a great diversity of dramatic treatments in opera. And this opera is very aware of that. It's one of the things I love. The idea of having a dance in the middle of it has thousands of examples in the art form.
That's such an Enda Walsh thing as well. Another Arts Festival production was Arlington a few years ago. People saw that. You had 3 acts, and I was reading the script afterwards, and the second act was Act 2, a dance. That was a 20-minute dance piece.
Sounds about right.
And the same choreographer, too.
Yeah, same Emma Martin, of course, yeah. So you're right, it's a reminder, it's Enda Walsh's world, and we live in it. There's one, perhaps time just for one very last question there. Yeah, thanks.
Did you hear something new in Denny's music in this opera? Something that you hadn't heard before?
For those of you who didn't hear the question is whether there's something new in this score in Donica's music that is maybe it's the addition of children or something that I will say that Donica's written 3.5 operas. He wrote the Last Hotel and Second Violinist and The First Child, and he wrote a court of oratorio called The Hunger. And all of these 4 pieces are extraordinary pieces. They become less and less instrumentally based and more vocally based over time as Donica has become more sophisticated in the way he thinks about how the voice drives the drama. And I think one of the things that, when Enda and Donica first got together to work, I think they were quite tentative at the beginning. They wanted to stay out of each other's way a little bit. Donica didn't want to musicalize and therefore take away the effectiveness of Enda's stagecraft, and Enda was still trying to figure out how music lived in his world. And then the Second Violinist was very much often was an opera and then also occasionally a play with a soundtrack, and they kind of alternated between the two. For me, this is a full operatic score. The vocal writing drives the drama from the beginning. The vocal writing is the heart of the psychology and the emotion of this piece. And Donica wrote it so quickly, but he wrote it with the full experience of the 3 shows that came before it. There is the band often stays much more out of the way of the stage that I've seen in the way it accompanies, but also it trusts the voice. There are aria after aria in this opera where there were only maybe a handful in the Second Violinist, because Donica has just grown incredibly confident in himself to write vocal lines that will tell the psychological and emotional story. So yes, I do think that this is his best score. I mean, a conductor shouldn't say what his favorites are, but I think this is the most integrated, the most operatic, and the most musically successful of all of them. Although I would conduct any of them in a heartbeat. Wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I will come and do it, because I love Donica's music. By the way, if you liked this music and want to hear a completely different universe, but even equally masterful, please do yourself a favor and go find a piece that Donica wrote, released last year, called Tessellatum. It's written for viola da gamba and cello, but both of those players layering 16 versions of themselves on top of each other. It is one of the great masterpieces of the 21st century. So I encourage you all to go find Tessellatum by Donica Dennehy. You will become obsessed with it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. For more episodes, visit giaf.ie or find First Thought Backstage on any podcast platform.